I'm going to call to order the work session on AO 2014-2S. We'll begin by going around and doing introductions, beginning with you, Ms. Gray Jackson.
Albie Gray Jackson.
Tim Steele.
Ms. Dembowski and Mr. Trainey are both with us. Mr. Trainey is back in
Dembowski
conversation. Pardon?
Dembowski is
Oh,
not.
Amy, sorry. Ms. Dembowski's not. Mr.
Adam
Trombley?
Trombley.
Ernie Hall?
Julia Tucker, Assembly Council.
Okay. Mr. Trainey, are you're handling this one?
Yep. Well, why don't you guys come and join us at the table, okay? Just come on up and join us. Is there a handout? We're
We
working
haven't
on
got
it.
him yet.
Yeah.
No. The only one that has one to change. She's the only one who came prepared.
Well, I'm going to go on this side. So.
Oh, you're gonna go on that side.
Do we have? Are we on tape now?
We are, yes.
Okay. Can you guys identify yourself for the record, please, Jane?
My name is Jane Anglick. I'm the chair of the Citizens Task Force on the Public Participation.
Bob Churchill, Vice Chair, same process.
Carolyn Ramsey, member of the task force.
And we've been
And
joined
Pat
by Mr. Flynn.
Hello, sir.
Mr. Trainey, it's your meeting.
Thank you. We need to get a copy of this version for everybody here, so what we're talking about. Who has their S version? You've got yours. You got yours, LB?
Well, I talked to the clerk this morning, and they're gonna have copies.
They're on the way out,
Yeah.
evidently.
You want to start and talk about the S version?
Actually.
Or you want to wait till you get copies?
I would prefer, if, not to put you on the spot, but I would prefer that our attorney address
Okay.
the issue, because she's the one who drafted it on our behalf.
Julia?
Thank you.
We have an S version, and with the S version, this time the sponsors requested that we do an AM that laid out each of the changes from the original to the S version, and so that's set out and don't get it, but I can just talk from that. I guess they don't have, nobody has the original either, so it's sort of awkward. So if you are, will go back and think about what, some of the things that were talked about between the version that was introduced in the S version. One of the first things that was talked about was reference to the 11 p.m. Mandatory adjournment. And so that was added for clarification in the audience participation subsection, because sometimes the agenda gets so close to mandatory adjournment, it takes 8 votes to continue a meeting, and if the meeting isn't continued, then it has to shut down at 11, and if no matter what business on the agenda is left remaining. That's in the charter. And so, oftentimes there are not 8 votes to keep it open for assembly business and or audience participation. And so that's clarified in on page 2 of the S version. The second change was to redraft section 2.30.050F, again for clarity. And in this mechanism, the sponsor is identified as being the responsible party for providing a summary of changes, comparing the S version changes to the most recent published version. And the term presented is substituted for introduced. So public posting is not limited to the municipal website. It may include print copies available in assembly chambers. So that was a change that was discussed and redrafted into the S version. A third change is that subsection 230.055C is in the S version to clarify that a person previously testifying on an earlier version of legislation may also re-testify on any changes in a subsequent version, while the public hearing remains open. And so that was something that, was brought to the attention of the work group here, in reviewing the ordinances introduced. Then the fourth change is that, in section 3 on page 4, under ordinance section 2.30.055 D2, the request to initiate a sign-up list will be made to the municipal clerk by noon on the day prior to public hearing and will be implemented at the meeting unless 6 members deny the request by majority vote on the record. And so that was a mechanism substituted for some other discussions that took place about having 3 people sponsor the sign-up list and some other mechanisms that just was more simplified to have it be implemented unless there were exigent, these words aren't used, but there could be circumstances that I couldn't put in, that I couldn't envision thoroughly enough to put into code, but there could be circumstances where 6 members of the assembly can request by majority vote not to have a sign up, and then they go on the record. AO section 3 at page 4, language was revised to recognize the Wilden Marston Theater may be unavailable due to prior reservation, for public performances and other engagements, which must also be accommodated. So that was just a revision to indicate that that the ancillary facility there would be set up basically if available. And then the last change is in section 5 at page 5, line 20, that for ease of reference, guidelines for public participation may be placed at the podium and elsewhere within the assembly chambers, and that's to make sure that those rules of decorum guidelines that were suggested by the municipal attorney and somewhat separate from the code changes could, the clerk was authorized by the assembly to post this at the podium and by placard within the assembly chambers.
We still don't have a copy of it up here for everybody yet.
In your binder on 11E. In your
What?
binder.
Oh, it's in ours, but not there.
Not
Yeah.
sure.
And not Eugene's, huh?
They're bringing them.
Okay. Jane, you've got your copy.
Mr. Chairman,
Let's go to the most controversial one. I'm here, the only one that may be a problem. It's on page 4 or 5, item 2, line 4. Dealing with the sign-up sheet. Because this is written now, anybody can call up and request a sign-up sheet. We call the clerk's office. And there are some that believe that only the chairman should, since they're the head of the assembly, as long as they've got 6 votes. Have to remember that because every now and then we are shown the door. They decide whether sign-up sheets needed or not. Your point of view on it, Jane?
the committee's point of view was articulated in our recommendations, which is that a citizen should be able to request a sign-up sheet. This version is okay with me in terms of saying that they can still request a sign-up sheet unless 6 of you say we don't want a sign-up sheet. And I cannot even imagine what the conditions of that would be, but the task force recommendation was that any citizen would be able to make that recommendation. And this amendment was developed by Julie, I believe, right?
Yes, at the request of the Rules Committee. Yes,
Fine.
ma'am.
So I seek the guidance of, or response of the task force.
If I may.
Adam,
Sure.
just a comment?
What's the point of allowing that? If we have an item before the body that let's assume that we didn't expect there to be a bunch of testimony, but there's 300 people that show up to testify on an item, what we would initiate a sign-up list at that time to make sure that we can manage people as we move forward in other meetings. What's the point of having a single citizen call in and say, I want a sign-up sheet on 2014-55?
If the individual called had encouraged many people to come to the hearing, that they might have some insight that you were going to have a lot of people. It's simply a tool to help you organize the public hearing to accommodate however many people show up.
Okay, now does that, are you only allowed to sign up on the list at the assembly meeting? Or when they call in and tell the clerk's office, I want a sign-up sheet for AO whatever, and put my name on it right now? Can they do that, or do they have to sign up at the assembly meeting?
She would know the answer to that, but what would happen is you would call into the clerk's office, your name would be on the list, then that list would be available to send a meeting for anybody else that wanted to sign up to testify on that.
So your name would immediately be put on when you called in?
Well,
Theoretically, that's the way it's written in here.
No, that's not.
That's not.
I thought that was written. Julia.
It's just.
Okay, so let me ask you this: if somebody requests a sign-up sheet, but nobody comes to the assembly meeting to sign up, can we still? Is it okay to still take action on that item?
Sure.
Okay, so no. So what I'm trying to avoid is that someone comes in and says, "Why I asked for the sign-up sheet, I wasn't able to come testify or sign up on the sign-up sheet, but you guys took action even though I requested a sign-up sheet and wasn't here." No, I understand that. I understand that. But what I want to avoid is that situation. It's not your intent.
No, sir.
Okay. All right.
LB?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank
And
you.
and Adam, I appreciate your comments and your concern. It's pretty valid, okay? But as far as the Assembly's ability to act on anything that's before us, really has nothing to do with the sign-up sheet. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Tim?
Yeah, my point is, I think this is a fix. I was concerned that there may be a personnel cost if somebody just calls in and requests a sheet and then people don't show up. You've got an extra body there that you're paying for, somebody to manage a sheet. And the fact that you do it by noon the day before at least gives you a heads up such that you can have folks there if necessary to do it. So I think this is a good fix.
From you guys? Anything
Well,
else
I
on that?
guess I would add too, and I parallel this to a number of committees I've chaired, mostly dealing with everything from wolf wars to fish wars in the state. I know I would appreciate a heads up as chair of many of those committees if the head of the drift netter said, we plan to have 100 people there to testify, we think you ought to put X into place. And again, and I think Mr. Tromley's concern is well placed, but I don't see that being a negative. If nobody shows up, nobody's going to have to administer the list.
Well, but you have to pay them
Yeah.
to be there.
But wouldn't you have a person from the clerk's office in the room anyway?
My understanding from the clerk's office was they didn't anticipate
There
this
wasn't a
being
need
any
for an extra
additional
personnel
cost.
to
No,
do that.
that was my clear impression, and I doubt. I mean, Amanda would or Barbara would be the ones.
I think it's better to have, if the purpose is to give us a heads up that
Yes.
they're coming, it's okay to have it the
And
day before.
we think this would be invaluable. Plus, it gives the population at large a feeling that the tool's there, whether they
Yeah.
use it or not.
Julia?
The feedback that I've received about this, and I can't remember if some of that feedback was in the public discussion that resulted in this, was the choice of the word shall. And so the feedback was that this was sort of giving up some control of the assembly chambers to a single citizen, and that perhaps a better choice of words would have been that the municipal clerk may implement a sign-up sheet and just leave it discretionary there. And so I anticipate that will be the subject of the discussion on this, not so much whether it's helpful to have a person call up and give a heads up, but if the mandatory language should remain in place there. So it'd be helpful for you to share your thoughts thoughts about that, because I think that was discussed in a broader group, but maybe some of the people here weren't present.
Mr. Chairman, during the process of the task force, we did have a couple public hearings, and there was a person who testified who said that they had requested a sign-up sheet, and that request had been rejected, and that the notion was that if a person did request a sign-up sheet for a large group of people, that the assembly would have to say yes or no, but in this case it says 6 people would have to say no, but that there actually had been a request and that was turned down by the chair.
My memory is the same. This, I think, the shall, I would really encourage you to leave in, because I think it'll give some credibility with the public. There was a real dramatic concern, both in testimony and that when this was not done, people felt diminished. They didn't feel the process was run well, and quite frankly, if really it's throwing a problem in, you got 6 votes, you don't have to do it. And I just see this as an opportunity to put some faith in the public at large, give them some perceived, if not real, power in the process. The sign-up list was visited again and again and again in public testimony, and it's probably, it may well be over-focused on, but this is our opportunity to say, hey, you've got some power in this place. And if it's well-placed, we'll support you, but if it's not, it'll take 6 of us to say no. I would really encourage you to embrace this. If it becomes a problem, you're the folks that can change it down the road, but I don't anticipate it being a problem.
Carolyn?
I completely agree with everything that has been said, and I would also like to add to it that the chances of people actually calling up to request that sign-up list it's not going to be a frequent occurrence. It's real. I don't personally foresee it would be a frequent occurrence. So I believe the tools should be there for the public to be able to utilize.
Yes, Tim?
Yeah, I guess I just add that from my standpoint, I see it as a way to let the public know that they are part of the system and that they have the ability to do that. I really don't see it as a setup for any abuse of the system, because if you ask for a sign-up sheet, it just means that you ask for a sign-up sheet. People are going to sign up on the sheet or not sign up on the sheet, and they'll testify and get on with it. And I don't see a way to abuse it, really.
Okay. Jim? Anything?
Well, the only comment I was going to make on this was actually that we tried to push it. We originally had it set up for any time prior to the assembly meeting. We now have noon the day before public testimony, so you have plenty of time to prepare for it. So it shouldn't be an administrative burden on the clerk.
Thank you. Yes, Carolyn?
One other thing I'd like to add that we ran into was the fact that when a sign-up sheet did not happen, then the public took it into their own hands to make some sort of a sign-up list or sheet. We saw this done with 37, with the unions actually ran the sign-up list. And they, in my opinion, did a pretty good job that time. We also saw it under 64, where a sign-up list was implemented and run by a member of the public. And people at that time were denied the right to testify because they were told, for whatever reasons they were given, that they were not allowed to sign up on the list. So we would rather say, the public say, we want a sign-up list so that we know that it is controlled by the body, so that everybody that can testify, and people are not denied their ability to testify.
Barbara, since you're here, come on up.
Yes, sir, Mr. Trainee.
Thank you, ma'am. We're dealing with the issue, of course, on the sign-up sheet. You're familiar with the S version language in there.
Yes.
Can you tell us from your perspective what you see that envisioning a problem with this, if there is one?
From the clerk's perspective, having a telephone call the day before the meeting and instituting a sign-up sheet would not be particularly burdensome for the clerk's office as long as it wasn't abused. I do think, and I honestly said to all of you, that I think that we can make some improvements in the sign-up process, and we're looking to do that. My biggest concern about this is that the sign-up list is mandatory, absent a denial by the majority of the assembly. So my issue is not with the clerk's office, it's more with my understanding of how the assembly functions, and I believe that the assembly functions a lot in its rules and procedures with the chair. And so to some degree, this really takes away the power of the chair to make this decision. And if that's what the assembly decides to do, that's fine, but that's my perspective, is that it's taking away the power of the chair. And it's also putting the assembly in sort of like an override position, where you have to have 6 to override this decision, other than it, you have to have a majority to make a decision. So my concerns and the issues that I see with it are that it's different than the way you usually do business. But as far as the clerk's office is concerned, I think the administrative burden on our office would be manageable.
Thank you. Ernie?
The thing I see with the override in this is there's a catch-22 to it, that the body can override it with a vote of 6, but the only time they're going to be able to override it is after the meeting is convened. So you've got an individual that's asked for a sign-up sheet that should be there prior to that time, and then the only way that, you know, if it's decided to override it, you got to call the meeting to order and then make a decision. So at that point, the clerk has already had to implement the sign-up sheet. So, because there's no way to get a vote of the body without it being, you can't call the assembly and say, do I have 6 that oppose?
I guess what I'd be curious, what would kind of work would that entail to prior to the vote for your office, Laura?
It doesn't have anything to do with my office. It has to do with they vote in public.
So, I don't.
Okay. Patrick?
Yeah, I just want to make sure.
And LB?
I think the way I'm reading this is the request to be in writing, so they can't just call up and ask for a list or for a sign sheet. Is that correct? Correct.
What?
Yeah, they have to make a request in writing.
A written request.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not random phone calls to the clerk's office. I presume written request also includes an email. The only risk I can see there is there's a lot of different email addresses into the clerk's office. I don't know how closely they're all monitored. You know, someone might know Amanda, send it to her, and she's busy doing elections and therefore not paying attention to her email. I think that's the only risk I see there.
But wouldn't that be remedied by the language that I think Julia's drafted this way, to the municipal clerk? It would be my burden to make sure that the municipal clerk, i.e. Ms. Jones, gets that, not Amanda or any of the other competent staff.
Even Barbara takes vacations.
And she told me you didn't allow that. That's what, no.
Her email follows her everywhere she goes. Yes, LB,
Thank
ma'am.
you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah,
First
Jim.
off, as public servants, I can't imagine any of us denying the public a right to have a sign-up sheet, number one, okay? And if that is the case, in the beginning, first off, the sign-up sheet happens at the meeting, and in the beginning of the meeting, and the chair in the beginning of the meeting can simply say, we have a request for a sign-up sheet, are there any objections? You know, we can deal with that in the beginning of the meeting and then move on. That's how I see it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're
Jim?
2 points here. I think the objective here is again, as I testified the other night, the objective here is not to try and revisit what might have happened in the past. So, in the 80s and 90s when I served, we had different issues where a sign-up sheet would have been a good idea too. But the key bit here is the sign-up sheet is being run by the municipal clerk's office and not by an advocate. And back in the days, when I served, I remember one advocate who has a church in East Anchorage ran a sign-up sheet. Well, you could only get on that sign-up sheet if you happen to be their flavor. And so they manage testimony and imply to others that they should speak. The point here is the clerk's office is going to manage it. So people who are testifying have the assurance that they're going to be able to speak once
Thank
they
you,
get their
Jim.
name on the list. The other point I would make is the assembly is obviously going to vote no if the night of the testimony, the person who asked for the sign-up sheet thinks there's going to be 100 people there and 3 show up. You'll vote no need for the sign-up sheet. We'll just take the people here, because you'll be able to assess the size of the crowd in the audience.
Thank you. Dennis, and then Barbara, and then Elvie, and then Tim.
My
Dennis?
comment is not actually about the list, but of a different part of the ordinance, so I could wait if you want to finish on the list issue, or I can make.
Let's finish up the list, and I'll come back and get you, Dennis. Barbara?
My comment, I'm going to respond to Jim's comment that part of the purpose of addressing this is the problems of having people outside of the assembly manage the sign-up list. And I think that that may be a valid point. However, that's not what this addresses. And if you wanted to, you could have some provision in here that, that says any sign-up list shall be managed by the municipal clerk. And that would address this concern and the other concerns that I've heard, but then it doesn't usurp what I believe is some of the traditional roles of the assembly managing itself.
Thank you, Barbara. Mr. Potter?
Sitting here and I'm never going to use the word never because something always comes up. But I've tried to envision under what circumstance you'd really take 6 members and deny the sign-up sheet, even if only one person signed up on it. They have the sign-up sheet. The chair gets the sign-up sheet. You call that person up. They testify. You ask, is there anybody else that would like to testify on this issue? No, you're done. I'm having a tough time envisioning a situation in which you would actually need to vote to deny it, and it would have to be so obviously abusive of the system that it would be clear that the assembly needed to do something. But in over 30 years of attending assembly meetings, I don't know that I've even seen one event in which that would be the case. So I really don't think this is a setup to be abused. I don't think the assembly's ever going to really have to vote. Even in Jim's case, if there's 3 people that show up, let them sign up on the list. You're still obligated to ask if there's anyone else there to testify. And if there's another 2 people that aren't on the list that want to testify, then you get 5 people that testify, and then you take your vote. So this just ensures that there's a neutral party that takes and manages the list, and people get an opportunity to testify. And they should have that protected opportunity. That's it.
Tim, all the years I've been on the assembly, which is a few, we've never denied the public the opportunity to testify on an issue. The standard question every chairman asks is there anybody else who wants to testify on this issue? Because we're there to service the public. We don't shut the public out. Dennis? And then we've got to shut this down because it's 12.
But just a caution that I mentioned at other meetings on the same topic, and that is that there's no relief valve in here. So when you have an item that has a deadline and you have people that still want to testify, you're obligated under this code to continue the public hearing. So you're going to be faced with violating a code that has a deadline or this code in that scenario. So you have no relief valve. And in fact, the S version actually compounds that because on page 3, regarding S versions, you're allowing more opportunity for people to testify on S versions. The court standard is there a substantial change? You've taken that out. So if an S version changes a period or a comma, the change has no material effect. You're still going to be required for this code to allow them to back, right? So your public hearings are gonna be extended. So I just wanna make sure everybody understands that you may at some point run into a problem where you've got a deadline for a ballot prop, for example, and that you're not able to meet that if you comply with this requirement that the public hearings get continued.
Thank you, Dennis. Well, it's 12 o'clock, so this meeting is adjourned. We'll take action on Tuesday on this item.
Thank you all.
Thanks for being here today.
Our pleasure.
Our next one starts at 12.